I'm Bill Tramposch. I'm the Executive Director of the Nantucket Historical Association, 30 miles offshore of Massachusetts in America. But I wanted to speak with you today from a couple of perspectives. I've also been the Chief Executive of New Zealand Historic Places Trust, and my family and I have the privilege of being dual citizens of New Zealand and the U.S. And so from those two perspectives, I wanted to talk about an extraordinary man and an equally as extraordinary family, Lindo Ferguson. But I'm going to start by talking with you about Nantucket, about the connections between Nantucket and Mangonui, which you might find surprising, some of the images, which are so different from the tranquility we see around here today. So I wanted to talk with you about that and also give you some insight into what's coming up as we develop more and more relationships with Mangonui and Butler Point Museum. I really apologize for not being here right now, but I'm actually doing the good work of the Butler Point Museum in Washington, D.C., where I'm talking about this very topic that I'm going to cover with you in the next few minutes. And this topic is about the historical and the future connections between Nantucket and Butler Point. It's at a Fulbright conference that involves people from Australia, New Zealand, and the United States. And so I'm very pleased to be doing that, but I miss terribly not being here on this particular celebratory day. A bit about Nantucket. Nantucket was the whaling capital of the world for many years. It was a Nantucketer who first came around South America and into the Pacific, the first American to do so in search of the great sperm whale. His name was Bunker. And he lived just a few doors away from where I live on Nantucket now. He was just the first. What followed were masses and masses, legions of whalers coming into New Zealand harbors. They knew these harbors so well that I guess that they might have known them better than some of the coves and inlets around the very island of Nantucket. They certainly spent a lot of time at sea, as I'll cover in this excerpt from Moby Dick that I do in a moment. Today, though, Nantucket is a National Historic Landmark. It's a small island. It's what Melville called an elbow of sand. There are about 10,000 people in the winter, 50,000 in the summer, so it's become a major tourist attraction. But in the 19th century, this was it. This was the center of multinationalism, international trade for America. This was the first reaching out in the Industrial Revolution in America. And what they were reaching out for was whale oil. Whale oil that would make candles that burned so pure that even Jefferson himself commented about the Nantucket whale oil candles. Edmund Burke in the halls of Parliament proclaimed and envied the industry of the Nantucketers, mostly Quakers, what Melville called Quakers with a vengeance, who would reach out and search out the whale for the sperm oil. It was a different time. Highways were seas. We look at life differently today, but the highways we traveled were the seas. So the seas connected rather than divided people. Another important difference between then and now is that the work of a day happened only in the daylight that was provided. It was a candle. It was a Nantucket spermaceti candle in particular that lit the halls and the streets of the world in ways that allowed people to extend the day. We take that so naturally today, but it was a time when all of that was changing too. And Butler Point was a center of that. So today Nantucket is a National Historic Landmark, 800 buildings built before our Civil War, probably 600 of which were built before the Treaty of Waitangi, are still standing in these streets that shiver with history on Nantucket. So that's the end of my brief discussion of life on the other side. What I want to talk about now is life here in this harbor in the years that followed Bunker's travels in 1792 when he came into Doubtless Bay. I like to think that he clapped his eyes on Mangonui too, but we have no proof of that. But I can pretend that he saw what whalers saw in the years subsequent to that. Now, this is where William Butler fits into it. He was prescient. He was a marketer. He very well was aware of the significance of this harbor to the future of this budding industry. He bought here in 1840, first on Pyfenoa, and then more and more land around, and then Butler Point itself. And he was a very wise man with an incredibly hospitable family. So this house, this piece of land, became not only an economic center of world trading, but also a hospitable center for those traveling the seas in search of the whale oil. Many people commented that members of the Butler family competed almost against each other to see who could be more hospitable to the guests who came to this house. Butler, being prescient, being a marketer, being very much on top of things, was aware that by 1852, Nantucket was kind of falling out of the picture as the center of whaling for many reasons, and New Bedford and other ports were becoming more the center. The fact is, though, that all of these whalers were scions of Nantucketers in their own right. And Nantucket by this time, by the time 1852 happens, which I'll describe in a moment here, by that time Nantucket becomes almost a mythological place. And I thought I would read you something from Moby Dick by Melville, who actually, when he wrote this, had never visited Nantucket himself. And I think it will give you a sense of not only what a powerhouse Nantucket was, but also how important places like Butler Point were to Nantucket. What wonder, then, these Nantucketers, born on a beach, should take to the sea for a livelihood. They first caught crabs and quahogs in the sand. Grown bolder, they waded out with nets for mackerel. More experienced, they pushed off in boats and captured cods. And at last, launching a navy of great ships on the sea, explored this watery world, put an incessant belt of circumnavigations around it, peeped in on Bering Straits in all seasons, in search of the mightiest animated mass that survived the flood. And thus have these native Nantucketers, these sea hermits issuing forth from their anthill in the sea, Nantucket, overrun and conquered the watery world like so many Alexanders. For the sea is his, he owns it, as emperors own empires. The Nantucketer, he alone resides and riots on the sea. He alone, in Bible language, goes down to the sea in ships, to and fro, plowing it, as it were his own special plantation. There is his home. There is his business. He lives on the sea as prairie cocks live on the prairie. He hides among the waves. For years he knows not land, the Nantucketer, so that when he comes to it at last, it smells like another world, more strangely than the moon would to an earthman. With the landless gull that at sunset folds her wings and is rocked to sleep between billows, so at nightfall the Nantucketer, out of sight of land, furls his sails and lays him to his rest, while under his very pillow rush herds of walruses and whales. You can see that Melville is enamored with the power of Nantucket as not only a real place, but a mythical place. And by this time, though, he's written Moby Dick in 1850. 2 years later, let me describe what's happening here in this very port. In 1 month, January 1852, the crescent of water that goes around Butler's Point is clogged with whale ships, 27 at one time. Now, you figure each of those whale ships has 30 men on board. My math says it's 810 men on board and in grog halls and doing what they do when they're off ship in these harbors. That's a lot. That's a huge amount of people coming in here. Clogged is a great word for how used this harbor was. In the years between 1850 and 1860, 251 American whale ships came into these harbors that are so placid today. 251. And that marked the height of the American Renaissance. In the middle of the 1850s, 1855, 1856, let's say within those 10 years, America is not only doing some of the best painting, landscape painting in the world, but it's also producing Whitman's Leaves of Grass, Hawthorne's Scarlet Letter, and of course Melville's mighty novel Moby Dick. That's all happening at this very time when Butler is welcoming people, especially Americans. You might ask why they came to Butler Point and why they came into Mangonui. Well, it was in many ways a safe harbor. It was not free of the kind of vice and hellhole of the Pacific kind of activity that the Bay of Islands had. But what it had here was Butler's incredible cooperation with the Tangata Whenua. And the Maori around this area not only lent their pa, Rangi Kapiti, for a signal pole to signal incoming whalers, but they also served to find deserting whalemen. Now, if you'd been at sea for so many years and found that there wasn't as much romance to whaling as you thought, and you saw these beautiful harbors, you would think often of deserting. What would happen often in these harbors is that the whalemen would try to desert, but only to be captured quickly by the Maori, who would be given a bounty for picking up the whalemen. In fact, some of the ships went out to sea pretending to leave, understanding with the Maori that they would be coming back in a few weeks to pick up everybody who started to feel a little bit more comfortable knowing the ship had gone off, but then only to see the ship come back to pick them up again. This is what happened in these harbors. This is why this was so important. If Nantucketers, like so many Alexanders, created an incessant web of circumnavigation around the world, this very harbor, this very place, was a fastening point for that web that had huge ramifications for the world's economy and the growing New Zealand-American relations that survived to today. So I'm going to close with just an impression of what we're going to accomplish. We pledge ourselves at the Nantucket Historical Association. I've had the pleasure of being here with William and Jessica and Jan and Lindo and Letitia and the family, dreaming up things we might do together to regain that incessant web of commerce and understanding between America and New Zealand. And here's what we'll be doing. I'm speaking right now as you're listening to this in Washington, talking about this connection I've just described. We're also going to be bringing tours here. We'll have a tour coming next January that will explore these very connections. We're going to be doing exhibits. We're doing articles. All sorts of things will be happening because we really feel how important this connection is. But now I'm going to close because we have a couple in Lindo and Letitia in particular to thank, because in many ways they had the prescience and they had the respect for tradition and the past and the power of an historic place that Butler had. Butler felt it. Lindo and Letitia and their family now feel it too. This is a place, as Janet Frame once said about Oamaru, that shivers with history. And the family get that. We get that on Nantucket, and that's why we want to work more together. But let's give great thanks to a great man whom I had the pleasure of thanking when I was head of Historic Places Trust with another proclamation, Lindo Ferguson. What a remarkable man he is. And so today, I'm very pleased to know that as soon as I stop, William and Jan will be giving Lindo a wonderful proclamation, making him, by order of the board of the trustees of the Nantucket Historical Association, a fellow of the Nantucket Historical Association, an honor shared by the likes of Nat Philbrick, who, by the way, also has a letter that William will read on this very occasion to celebrate Lindo and celebrate everything that's happened here in the past and in the future. Thank you very much. I'm sorry you can't be with you, but think of the fact that I'm talking about Butler Point in Washington, too. Now, just in closing, Hiaha Itemehu. I want to make sure I get this right. I thought I had it right, but I'll read it in Te Reo. Hiaha Temeo Nui Iteahu. He tangata, he tangata, he tangata. What is the most important thing in the world? It's people, it's people, it's people. That is for you, Lindo. That is for you, Letitia. That's for you, William, Jan, and the entire whānau. Kia ora.
Ladies and gentlemen, and Ambassador Extraordinary Bill Tramposch, this is a special occasion for the local people and the Nantucketers represented by Bill. Let us join hands across the Pacific, New Zealand and America. The two countries have done it before. I am firmly of the belief that history does repeat itself. What is past is history. We can't blame anything on our forebears. Without whale oil, there would be no light or heat. Without whale oil, our predecessors' meagre existence would have been well nigh impossible to sustain. Today it's also all about oil, petroleum oil. We're reliving the history of fuel, which people are inclined to forget. Why don't we also seize this is a very special occasion to celebrate again our transoceanic ties. There's a little bit of green in all of it, and we must all answer the call. We are concerned at the thought of the extinction of whales, because to us they're creatures of rare beauty, even though we feature them in this museum, means by which is the past was fueled. We see them as living beasts of beauty and want to help sustain their existence. This is a special occasion, two cultures coming together again. The museum and grounds have long been a part of our way of life. Hopefully Letitia, Jan, William and myself will be able to continue with its support long into the future. We hope you enjoyed your visit and look forward to seeing you again in the future.